Story 1. The subway was suffocatingly crowded that evening, the air thick with heat and the low hum of murmured conversations. The rhythmic screech of metal against metal echoed through the tunnel, punctuated by the occasional garbled announcement over the intercom. I clung to a pole, absently scrolling through my phone, letting the monotony of the ride blur the edges of my exhaustion. Then, I felt it, a brush against my arm. It wasn't unusual. Not here, not in this sea of bodies packed too tightly together. I barely reacted, my focus still on the glow of my screen. But then, a presence pressed in closer. Too close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of someone's breath against my ear. A voice, low and deliberate, whispered just one sentence. "Be careful tonight." A shiver crawled up my spine. My breath hitched as I turned sharply, heart thudding in my chest. But the stranger was already moving, slipping effortlessly through the crowd, their forms swallowed up by the shifting tide of passengers. My mouth opened, but no words came. Who were they? What did they mean? I searched frantically, scanning faces, but whoever they were, they had vanished. All that remained was the whisper of their voice lingering in my ears, calm, yet laced with something eerily close to a warning. I told myself it was nothing. A prank. Someone amusing themselves at my expense. But the weight of their words settled uneasily in my chest, refusing to be dismissed. As the train rattled on, my mind spun through possibilities. Could they have mistaken me for someone else? Was it some bizarre social experiment? Or, worse, was there something I wasn't seeing? Something lurking just out of reach? By the time I stepped onto the platform at my stop, the unease had cemented itself in my bones. I glanced over my shoulder more than once as I walked, the normally familiar streets now cast in unfamiliar shadows. The distant hum of city life felt muted, the darkness heavier than usual, pressing against me like a tangible force. Every noise was amplified. Every flickering street lamp, a threat. I curled my fingers around my keys, the sharp edges digging into my palm as I quickened my pace. Inside my apartment, I bolted the door without thinking. Something I rarely did. The lock clicked into place, but the sense of security it usually brought was absent. Hours passed, but the stranger's words stayed with me, looping in my mind like a broken record. I distracted myself with my phone, flipping through notifications, half-reading messages, but nothing could shake the cold feeling that had settled in my gut. What was supposed to happen tonight? What exactly was I supposed to be careful about? Eventually, I tried to drown out the paranoia with a movie, something light, something to pull me out of my own head. But the unease never left. Even in the comfort of my own space, I felt watched. Exposed. Then, my phone buzzed. The sound made me jump. I grabbed it, expecting a text from a friend. But the number was unknown. And the message was short. "Are you still being careful?" A chill shot through me. My fingers trembled as I tightened my grip on the phone. My pulse pounded against my skull. How did they get my number? Was it the same person from the subway? Had they followed me home? I locked my phone, heart hammering. Calling the police seemed ridiculous. What would I even say? That a stranger had whispered something cryptic on the subway and now I was terrified. That I had received a text that, objectively, wasn't even threatening. I spent the night in restless paranoia, every creak of the apartment building making my breath hitch. At one point, I swore I heard faint footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I crept to the peephole, pulse roaring in my ears. The hallway was empty. I barely slept, my body wound too tightly, every nerve on edge, waiting, for what? Morning finally arrived, thin rays of light filtering through my curtains, bringing the kind of relief that felt too fragile to last. But the moment I opened my door, the fragile illusion shattered. An envelope was taped to the wood. I stared at it, dread coiling in my stomach. My fingers felt numb as I peeled it away, my breath catching as I unfolded the paper inside. There were only 5 words. This is your only warning. I swallowed hard, the room tilting around me. This wasn't random. This wasn't a joke. Someone had singled me out. Someone who knew where I lived. Someone who had gone to great lengths to unsettle me. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they wanted. But I couldn't shake the bone-deep certainty that whatever they were warning me about, it hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Story 2. The night I came home, the air inside felt unnaturally cold. Not the kind of cold that creeps in through a drafty window or lingers after the sun sets. This was different. It clung to the walls, settled in my bones. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my imagination or maybe the changing weather. Tossing my bag onto the couch, I headed toward the kitchen, craving something warm to drink. That's when I saw it, something smeared across the floor. At first, I thought it was just a scuff mark or maybe dirt I had tracked in. But as I stepped closer and crouched down, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. Muddy footprints. A trail of them. They started at the back door and stretched down the hallway. The sight sent a slow, crawling dread up my spine. My breath hitched as I turned to look at the door, already knowing what I'd find. Locked. Secure. Just as I had left it that morning. I always double-check. Always. I followed the prints carefully, my footsteps light, my pulse loud in my ears. They were deep, distinct, as if someone had walked in with soaked, heavy boots. The hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching ahead like a tunnel, my bedroom door slightly ajar at the end of it. A sliver of light spilled into the hall, making the shadows shift and ripple. I hesitated. Swallowing hard, I pushed the door open. Nothing looked out of place. The bed was made, the curtains drawn, everything exactly as I had left it. Except for one thing. The footprints ended right in front of my bed. Stopped, just like that. No return trail. No sign of where the intruder, or whatever it was, had gone. It was as if they had just vanished. I checked the windows. Locked. The closet. Empty. Every inch of my house was just as it should be. Yet the footprints had been there, real, tangible. And now, I was left with a terrifying question: where had they gone? That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house made my skin prickle, every shifting shadow held a presence I couldn't see. I left the hallway light on, but it did nothing to chase away the unease curling in my gut. My mind replayed the scene over and over, searching for some rational explanation. By morning, I forced myself to scrub away the muddy prints until no trace of them remained. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe there was an explanation. I tried to convince myself of that. But deep down, I knew better. For the next few days, the feeling of being watched never left me. I caught myself glancing at the windows, expecting, dreading, to see something looking back. I stopped using the back door entirely, choosing instead to enter and leave through the front. Then, one evening, just as I was locking up for the night, I saw it. A smear of mud on the floor by the back door. Faint. Almost insignificant. But fresh. My blood turned to ice. The lock was still secure. No sign of forced entry. But this time, I didn't follow the trail. I didn't want to know where it led. Instead, I called the police. They arrived quickly, searched the house from top to bottom. Nothing. No break-in. No sign of anyone having been inside. Just a polite smile from the officer, a few reassuring words, probably nothing, just a misunderstanding, no need to worry. As they left, I lingered by the door, staring at the floor. That's when I saw it. Outside. Barely visible in the dim evening light. A single muddy footprint. Pointing directly at the door. As if someone had been standing there. Watching. Waiting. I haven't seen the footprints since, but every night, I check the locks twice. I leave the lights on. The house feels different now, like it's holding on to something, something it refuses to reveal. I don't know who, or what, was in my home that night. But I feel it still. And some nights, I think it's still watching. Story 3. The shrill wail of my alarm shattered the silence, ripping me from sleep like a clawed hand yanking me from the depths of some unseen nightmare. My pulse pounded as I fumbled blindly for my phone, fingers shaking as I silenced the noise. The screen's glow bathed my face in cold light. 4 a.m. I froze. That wasn't right. My alarm was always set for 6 a.m., always. Still groggy, I tried to recall if I'd changed it, but my mind came up blank. No reason came to mind. No forgotten meeting, no early morning plans. And yet, there it was. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. The house around me was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing, watching. I swallowed hard and checked my alarm settings. Only one was listed, 4 a.m. No recent changes, no backup time. Nothing. The wrongness of it settled into my chest like a weight. I turned on the lamp, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I felt in the dark. The familiar shapes of my room looked distorted in the dim glow, as if something had shifted while I slept. My gut twisted. I got up and moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. The street outside lay still, bathed in the eerie orange glow of the streetlights. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, like grasping fingers reaching across the pavement. Everything looked normal. But it felt wrong. I shook it off. Maybe I'd just made a mistake, changed the alarm by accident and forgotten. I told myself that, over and over, until the thought almost felt convincing. Still, I couldn't shake the itch of unease crawling under my skin. Determined to clear my head, I left my bedroom, flicking on lights as I went. The house felt colder than usual. I checked the locks, front door, windows, back door, all secure. Then I stepped into the kitchen. And stopped. My phone, the very same phone I had just turned off upstairs, was sitting on the counter. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't brought it down. I knew I hadn't. It had been right there, on my nightstand, when I fell asleep. I approached it slowly, my breath shallow. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The alarm was still set for 4 a.m. But now, the screen showed something new. Missed call, unknown number. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. The call had come in 1 minute before the alarm went off. My hands felt numb as I tapped to check the voicemail. I lifted the phone to my ear, breath catching. At first, nothing. Then, a faint, crackling sound. A low hiss, like static. And then the whispers. Indistinct. Wrong. Layered voices tangled together in a warped murmur, just at the edge of comprehension. The sound crawled under my skin, slithering into my brain, like something whispering directly into my thoughts. I strained to make out words, any words, but the more I listened, the more I wished I hadn't. Because hidden beneath the noise, buried under the static and the whispers, was something else. Breathing. Slow. Ragged. Close. My stomach twisted. I pulled the phone away, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The whispering hadn't stopped. The sound was still there. Coming from behind me. I spun, heart hammering. The kitchen was empty. But the air felt thicker. Charged. Occupied. I put the phone down and backed away, my skin crawling with the weight of unseen eyes. My brain scrambled for logic, for anything that made sense. But nothing did. The hours until dawn stretched endlessly as I sat awake in the living room, every shadow a looming presence, every creak a whispered threat. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. By morning, the sun's light should have erased the fear, but the unease lingered, clinging to me like a stain I couldn't scrub off. I watched my phone all day, waiting. Nothing happened. No more calls. No more alarms. Maybe it was over. That night, I set my alarm for 6 a.m. and placed my phone firmly on the nightstand, where it belonged. Then, I slept. When I woke, the room was silent. My alarm hadn't gone off. Dread coiled in my gut as I reached for my phone. The screen was black. Powered off. I turned it on with shaking hands. As the screen lit up, my breath hitched. The alarm had changed. 4 a.m. It was waiting for me. Story 4. The gym pulsed with life, weights clanking in a steady rhythm, muffled music thudding through the air, the low hum of conversations blending into the familiar symphony of exertion. Sweat dripped from my brow as I finished my last set, my muscles burning with exhaustion. I reached for my towel, swiping it across my face, when something flickered at the edge of my vision. A figure. They stood near one of the machines, half hidden behind the bulk of the equipment. At first, I paid no mind. People paused all the time, either catching their breath or lost in their phones. But there was something off about the way they lingered. Still. Silent. Watching. The feeling crawled up my spine, an itch at the back of my mind I couldn't quite scratch. I turned my head slightly, pretending to adjust my wrist wraps, and that's when I saw it, the phone in their hand, angled unnaturally toward me. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. The realization hit hard, like the sudden drop of a barbell. They were taking pictures. Of me. A cold wave of unease spread through my chest. The screen's faint glow reflected on their face for a brief second as they adjusted their grip, completely unaware that I had caught on. My breath came slower, deliberate, my body tensed as a storm of thoughts crashed in my mind. What do I do? Confront them? Demand an explanation? But what if I was wrong? What if it was a mistake? No. Deep down, I knew better. The way they positioned themselves, partially concealed yet deliberate in their movements, it wasn't casual. It was calculated. I took a step forward. In that instant, their body jolted with awareness. They moved fast, too fast, ducking behind the machines, weaving through the maze of bodies with an unsettling agility. I quickened my pace, my pulse thudding in my ears as I maneuvered between weight racks and treadmills, following the ghost of their movement. But by the time I reached the spot where they had vanished, they were gone. I stood there, scanning the gym, my breath coming hard. Too many people. Too many exits. Whoever they were, they had disappeared into the crowd, slipping away like a shadow dissolving into darkness. I forced myself to finish my workout, but every moment was laced with paranoia. Every glance felt like a gaze boring into me. Every movement behind me sent a shiver through my skin. Rationality told me it was over, that they were gone. But my gut told me otherwise. Before leaving, I reported the incident to the staff. They nodded sympathetically, promising to check the security cameras. It was a hollow reassurance. This gym was huge, riddled with blind spots, dark corners where someone could lurk unseen. That night, the call came from the gym manager. They had reviewed the footage. It was inconclusive. The person's face never caught the light. They left the gym shortly after I noticed them. No way to identify them. No proof. No justice. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the unease gnawed at me. My skin prickled with the thought that somewhere, out there, images of me existed in the hands of a stranger. Someone I would never see again, but who had watched me, captured me, without my knowledge, without my consent. I never went back to that gym. I found another place, across town, where the staff were more vigilant, where the space felt open, less suffocating. But no matter where I trained, the memory lingered. A constant whisper in my ear. A reminder that eyes can hide in plain sight. Watching. Waiting. And you might never know, until it's too late. Story 5. The morning started like any other, mundane, predictable. I shuffled out of bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and reached for my phone. My inbox was the usual mess of work emails, spam, and promotional offers I had no interest in. But one email stood out. The subject line was simple, important. No sender name, just an address I didn't recognize, a strange combination of letters and numbers, like something generated at random. I hesitated. It could have been a phishing attempt, a mistake, or some automated junk. But curiosity has a way of overriding caution, doesn't it? So I clicked. The message was short. Just a single sentence. I thought you might want this. Attached was a file. My name was on it. My stomach twisted as I stared at the attachment, my finger hovering over the screen. Every rational part of my brain screamed, "Don't open it." But against my better judgment, I tapped. The document unfolded before me. And my blood ran cold. It was my entire medical history. Not just the basics, not just the routine checkups and vaccinations. Every appointment. Every prescription. Every diagnosis. There, in neat, meticulous detail, was everything. Dates, doctor's notes, private discussions I had with physicians behind closed doors, things even I had forgotten about. The level of detail was terrifying. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my breath shallow. Someone had this. Someone knew this. I slammed my laptop shut, my mind racing. My first instinct was to call my doctor's office. The receptionist answered in her usual chipper tone, but as soon as I explained what had happened, that brightness faded. "Our system is secure," she assured me. "There's no way anyone could have accessed your records without your consent." But someone had. And that meant they could have more. I tried tracing the sender, but the email led nowhere. No associated organization, no real identity, just a void of anonymity. Whoever had sent it had gone through great lengths to hide. For hours, I debated responding. Demanding to know who they were. How they got this. Why me? But I couldn't bring myself to do it. If they had my medical records, what else did they have? That night, I barely slept. Every noise in my apartment made my skin crawl. The rustling of the wind against my window, the distant hum of traffic, it all felt too loud, too close. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was just some sick prank. Then, the second email arrived. "You're welcome." No message. Just another attachment. My pulse pounded in my ears as I clicked. This time, the file contained scanned pages of my old journal. Handwritten entries, personal, private thoughts I had penned years ago. Words no one had ever read. Things I had locked away. The journal itself was still in my nightstand, untouched for ages. Yet, somehow, here it was, scanned page by page, as if someone had held it in their hands, flipped through it, studied it. I slammed my laptop shut so hard the screen flickered. My throat tightened. This wasn't just an invasion of privacy anymore. This was something else. This was a message. I went to the police the next morning. I showed them everything, the emails, the attachments. The officer listened, his brow furrowing. "It could be someone you know," he said. "Someone with a grudge. Think, has anyone in your life ever tried to scare you?" I racked my brain, but no one came to mind. No exes, no old friends turned enemies, no disgruntled coworkers. Nothing. For weeks after that, I lived in a constant state of paranoia. The emails stopped, but the damage had been done. I felt watched. Every time I stepped outside, I swore I could feel eyes on me. I started checking my locks 3, 4 times a night. I installed cameras, changed my passwords, even got a new email address. But it didn't help. Because then, one morning, I found a note taped to my front door. A plain piece of paper. One sentence. Did you enjoy the trip down memory lane? It was handwritten. In my handwriting. I ripped it down, my heart hammering. I ran to the window, scanning the street outside. It was empty. No strange cars. No figures lingering in the distance. But someone had been here. Someone had stood at my door. I changed my locks. Again. I moved apartments. Again. But the fear never left. Because whoever they were still out there. And they knew everything about me. Story 6. It started as just a flicker of unease, something I could almost brush off, at first. It was late in the evening when I noticed him, a lone figure sitting on the curb just outside my house. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, his face completely hidden in the shadows. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was waiting for someone, maybe he was just passing time. But as the minutes bled into hours, he remained there, utterly motionless. There was something unnatural about the stillness of him. People shift, fidget, check their phones, anything. But not him. He sat there like a statue, an unmoving silhouette beneath the dim, flickering glow of the street lamp. The longer he lingered, the more that initial flicker of unease grew into something colder, heavier. I peered out from behind my curtain, watching him. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. He never moved. Not once. A thick, uncomfortable silence settled over the street, pressing in on me like a weight. The longer I watched, the more suffocating it became. I kept glancing at my phone, debating calling someone. But what would I even say? That a man was sitting outside my house doing nothing? It sounded ridiculous. And yet, my gut told me otherwise. Hours passed, and the dread coiled tighter in my chest. My heart pounded against my ribs, the back of my neck prickling with a sensation I couldn't shake, like I was the one being watched. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. Gripping my phone tightly, I made up my mind. I would confront him. I would step outside, look him in the eye, and demand to know what the hell he was doing there. Fear and frustration warred inside me, but fear was losing. I was done sitting in silence, waiting for something to happen. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The cool night air sent a shiver down my spine. The street was deathly quiet. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded small in the vast emptiness of the night. "Can I help you?" Nothing. Not a single reaction. I took a step forward, but the moment I did, my breath caught in my throat. The curb where he had been sitting was empty. He was gone. A cold chill shot down my spine as I scanned the street, my eyes darting to every darkened doorway, every patch of shadow. There was no sign of him. No sound of retreating footsteps, no rustling in the bushes, nothing. It was as if he had vanished in the split second I looked away. My skin crawled with something deeper than fear, something primal. I turned sharply, rushing back inside and slamming the door behind me. My fingers trembled as I locked it, then double-checked every window, every latch. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened, but no explanation seemed to fit. I forced myself to sit down in the living room, my eyes fixed on the window. Watching. Waiting. But he never returned. At least, not that night. Sometime in the early morning, exhaustion finally won. I must have dozed off on the couch, because when I woke up with a start, the first rays of sunlight were spilling through the windows. For a moment, I felt relief. The night was over. It was only when I stood to stretch that I saw it. There, on the porch, right where I had stood the night before, was a small piece of paper. My stomach twisted into a knot. Every instinct screamed at me not to go outside, but I forced myself forward, my hands trembling as I picked up the note. The paper was rough, the handwriting uneven and scrawled. Just 4 words. "I'll be back." The words burrowed into my mind like a parasite, sending a sickening wave of fear crashing over me. I whipped my head around, scanning the street. It was empty. Silent. But it no longer felt like my street. It felt tainted. I wasn't safe. He hadn't just left a note. He had left a warning. Story 7. The night was calm, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. After a long, exhausting day at work, I was relieved to finally be heading home. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the occasional glint of headlights in the distance. The air was crisp, carrying that familiar late-night stillness that always made me feel at ease. But that night, something was different. When I reached my car, everything seemed normal at first. I unlocked the door, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat, and slid in behind the wheel. That's when I noticed it. The back seat was wet. At first, I assumed it was nothing, maybe I had spilled something and forgotten about it. But when I reached back and ran my fingers across the fabric, a chill crept down my spine. It wasn't just damp. It was soaked. The kind of wet that shouldn't be there. Like someone had upturned a bottle of water, drenching the seat. I frowned, scanning my surroundings. The pavement was dry. The sky was clear. There had been no rain. No leaks. No reason for the seat to be wet. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. My mind searched for a rational explanation, but the harder I tried to make sense of it, the more unsettling it became. I hadn't given anyone a ride. I hadn't left my windows open. And yet, here it was, a damp, inexplicably wet back seat in my locked car. A creeping unease settled over me, making my skin prickle. I checked the car's interior again, running my hands along the front seats, the floor mats, everything was dry. Only the back seat was wet. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe I had forgotten something. Maybe I had just spilled something earlier. But deep down, something felt wrong. I locked the car and stepped away, standing on the sidewalk for a moment. The thought that someone had been in my car, unnoticed, unseen, made my stomach turn. My mind jumped to the worst possibilities. Had someone broken in? But there were no signs of forced entry. Had someone been in my car while I was away? If so, why would they leave behind a wet seat and nothing else? That night, I barely slept. The image of the damp back seat clung to my mind, like a whisper of something I couldn't quite hear. Days passed, and I tried to shake the unease. Nothing else happened, and I convinced myself it was a fluke. A weird, one-time thing. But then, it happened again. A week later, after running some errands, I returned to my car and froze. My breath hitched as my eyes locked onto the back seat. It was wet. Again. This time, it wasn't as drenched as before, but the moisture was undeniable. Like someone had been sitting there, leaving behind a trace of water. A shiver crawled up my spine. This wasn't just in my head. It wasn't an accident. Someone, or something, had been in my car. Panic clawed at my chest. I stepped back, scanning the empty parking lot, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Was someone watching me? Was I being followed? I drove straight to the nearest police station, trying to keep my hands from shaking on the wheel. The officer listened to my story, took down my information, and nodded thoughtfully. But in the end, there wasn't much they could do. No crime had been committed. No real evidence. They suggested installing a security camera near my parking spot. I agreed, but I knew deep down a camera wouldn't erase the feeling growing inside me, the cold, suffocating certainty that something was terribly, terribly wrong. For weeks, nothing happened. The back seat remained dry. I started to convince myself it had all been some strange misunderstanding. Maybe it really had just been a spill I didn't remember. Maybe I had imagined the fear, let paranoia get the best of me. And then, the final time. That night, I was coming home from dinner with a friend. Laughing, relaxed, momentarily free from the weight of unease that had plagued me for weeks. But the second I reached my car, my body went cold. The back seat was wet again. Only this time, it wasn't just water. A metallic scent lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. A scent I recognized instinctively, even before my mind could form the words. Iron. Blood. My stomach twisted as I stumbled back, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. This was real. This was happening. Something, someone, had been in my car. Not just once. Not just twice. But again and again, leaving behind traces. Watching. Waiting. I fumbled for my phone and called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. This time, I wasn't just uneasy. I was terrified. Because now, I knew. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. And whoever, or whatever, had been in my car. They weren't done yet. Story 8. It started with a photograph. Pinned to a public bulletin board, staring back at me with an eerie familiarity, because it was me. Crystal clear, high resolution, almost too perfect. I stood frozen, my own face looking back at me from the image. There I was, standing on the sidewalk outside my apartment, dressed in the exact same clothes I had on that day. But I had never seen this picture before. I had never posed for it. The longer I stared, the more unsettling it became. Someone had taken this without me knowing. Someone had been watching me. A slow, creeping dread coiled around my spine as I scanned the crowd moving past. Did one of them do this? No one seemed to notice the photo except me. No explanation, no caption, just an image of me, posted for anyone to see. My fingers twitched at my sides, unsure whether to tear it down or leave it be. I took a shaky step closer, my breath shallow, as if making too much noise would disturb something unseen lurking nearby. The paper was cool beneath my fingertips as I traced the edges of the photograph, my mind racing with possibilities. Who had taken it? When? Why? Then I saw it. A second photograph. This one was different, taken from behind me as I stood in line at the very cafe I was in now. My body stiffened. The picture had been captured from a perfect vantage point, my posture relaxed, oblivious to the fact that I was being watched. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs as I turned, scanning the cafe with new eyes. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of mugs, it all felt wrong now. The world around me blurred as my focus zeroed in on a single, terrifying realization. This wasn't just a single moment stolen from my life. This was a pattern. My hands were clammy as I reached for the second photo, my pulse hammering against my temples. My stomach twisted into knots. And then I saw the third one. My breath caught in my throat. This time, the angle was distant, the quality grainy, but the details were unmistakable. I was in my living room, bathed in the glow of my laptop screen, alone. Or at least, I had thought I was alone. A sharp, suffocating panic took hold of me. Who took this? How? I had never left my curtains open. Had someone been inside my home? A cold sweat prickled my skin as my gaze darted to the windows, the door, the corners of the cafe where shadows stretched just a little too far. A primal instinct screamed at me, leave. Now. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. My legs felt weak, my body weightless. The air in the cafe was thick, suffocating. I needed to get out, but it felt like the walls were closing in, like every set of eyes in the room was secretly watching me, waiting. I shoved through the door and stepped into the cold air, barely aware of my surroundings as I quickened my pace down the street. My shadow elongated beneath the flickering streetlights, and for the first time in my life, I felt hunted. I reached my apartment, locked the door behind me, and checked every room, every closet. The silence was unbearable, thick with unseen presence. I barely slept that night, my mind plagued with whispers of unseen eyes, hidden cameras, a stranger's breath just beyond the walls. By morning, I was determined to get answers. I returned to the cafe, heart pounding. But when I arrived, the bulletin board was empty. The photos were gone. No trace, no evidence. As if they had never existed. A chill ran through me. Was this a game? A warning? Or was it just the beginning? Story 9. It had been a long, exhausting day. The kind that weighs on your shoulders, making every step feel heavier than the last. All I wanted was a moment of peace, a warm cup of my favorite coffee, the comforting hum of the espresso machine, the soft chatter of other patrons. My usual routine. My small escape. The coffee shop had always been a sanctuary of sorts. A quaint little cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, its golden glow spilling onto the sidewalk like a beacon on dark evenings. The scent of freshly ground beans and baked pastries wrapped around me like an embrace as I pushed the door open. Tonight, it was quiet. Just the way I liked it. I approached the counter, already reaching for my phone to place my usual order. That was when I noticed him. A new barista stood behind the register. Young, a bit nervous, his hands fidgeting as he adjusted his apron. But as our eyes met, his uncertainty vanished, replaced by a smooth, practiced smile. "Hi there," he greeted, his voice warm. "What can I get for you tonight?" I hesitated for only a second before ordering my usual caramel macchiato. He nodded, immediately setting to work, moving with a precision that seemed almost unnatural for someone so new. I stepped aside, waiting patiently, my attention drifting to the soft jazz playing in the background. Then he called my name. "Here you go," he said, sliding the cup toward me. I reached for it, my fingers barely brushing the cardboard sleeve before I froze. My name was written on it. Neatly. Perfectly. Not just the first letter, not an approximation. Every single letter in the right place. Precise, deliberate. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't told him my name. My breath hitched as I slowly lifted my gaze to him. He was already busy preparing another drink, but I could see the flicker of something in his expression, an awareness, a knowing look he tried to mask with polite indifference. "Is everything okay?" he asked without looking up. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "How did you know my name?" He glanced at me then, just briefly, and smiled. But it wasn't reassuring. It was, too practiced. Too perfect. "I guessed," he said simply, his tone almost too casual. "You look like a Sarah." But my name wasn't Sarah. It wasn't even close to Sarah. A strange, suffocating tension settled over me. My gut screamed at me that something wasn't right. That something was watching. That I was being watched. I should have pressed him. Demanded an explanation. But instead, I mumbled a quiet, "thanks," and hurried to my usual spot by the window, gripping the cup so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stared at my name written across the cup, my mind racing for a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had overheard someone else say it. Maybe he had seen it on my phone screen when I ordered. Maybe it was just some absurd coincidence. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't. A few days later, I went back. I told myself I was overthinking it. That I had let paranoia get the best of me. That it was just a mistake, nothing more. But when I stepped inside, he was still there. He greeted me with that same practiced smile, his eyes just a little too knowing, like he had been expecting me. I hesitated, but my craving for routine won over my unease. I ordered my usual again, my voice quieter this time. Watching him carefully. And when he handed me my drink, my stomach twisted into a knot. Because my name was there again. Perfectly written. Without me ever saying it. I didn't wait. I didn't sit down. I didn't even take a sip. I walked out, gripping the cup so tightly my fingers ached. I tossed it in the nearest trash bin as I reached my car, my pulse hammering in my ears. I never went back to that coffee shop. But the feeling never left me. That gnawing, unshakable sense that I had been seen. That someone, or something, knew me in ways they shouldn't. That no matter where I went, it was still watching. Story 10. It started with a simple hobby. I liked taking photos of places I visited, quiet streets, abandoned buildings, eerie forests at dusk. There was something peaceful about capturing a moment in time, especially in places most people overlooked. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to take a walk through an old park near my neighborhood. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows through the skeletal trees. The air was crisp, the silence only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves under my feet. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the empty pathway ahead. The dim light filtering through the branches gave the scene a haunting beauty. I took a few more shots, then headed home. Later that night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my photos, a chill crawled down my spine. There was a man in the last picture. Standing at the edge of the path, just beneath the trees. He hadn't been there when I took the photo. I zoomed in. His face was obscured by shadows, but he was tall, wearing a dark coat. His posture was stiff, unnatural, as if he had been standing there for a long time. Watching. I closed the gallery and tried to shake off the creeping unease. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, an illusion caused by the trees and shadows. I told myself that. I wanted to believe that. The next day, I was back at work, sitting at my desk, sipping coffee, and trying to focus on a report. Then my phone buzzed. A notification. My cloud storage had backed up my photos from last night. I opened the gallery again, hesitating before scrolling to the picture. The man was still there. Only this time, he was closer. I knew, I hadn't taken another picture. But there he was. No longer standing beneath the trees. Now, he was near the center of the path. Facing the camera. Facing me. My hands grew clammy as I locked my phone and shoved it into my pocket. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A glitch? A corrupted file? Maybe someone had edited the picture as a cruel joke. But that didn't make sense. I hadn't shared it with anyone. I didn't check the photo again until later that night. I wish I hadn't. Because when I opened it again, the man was even closer. Standing in the foreground now, his face still hidden, but his body was more defined. His coat looked tattered. His hands, long, thin fingers, were slightly outstretched. Like he was reaching for me. I dropped my phone. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't possible. It wasn't real. I deleted the photo. Every copy. Every backup. Then I turned off my phone, threw it across the room, and forced myself to sleep. I woke up to my phone buzzing. A text message. From an unknown number. There was no text. Just an image. My breath hitched as I opened it. It was a photo of my bedroom. Taken from the foot of my bed. And in the corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows, stood the man from the photo. Watching. Waiting.